The Atheist Debates Patreon Project presents Things You Don't Know. There's a lot of things that you don't know. And there's a lot of things that I don't know. And there's a lot of things that we don't know. For example, some of you may not know that preachers often buy or steal their sermons from other preachers. There's a popular sermon that deals with what you don't know. I've heard it, I don't know, from a handful of preachers. It's been passed around. I've watched preachers tell this. And the story is essentially that the preacher was invited to do a debate against some atheists at some university. And the description of the debate and how they were setting it up tends to already betray the dishonesty at hand, but it's quite often they were setting it up dishonestly. I'm going to get half as much time as their guy, and their guy is going to be disproving God, and I'm going to be there to prove God. And the whole thing is, okay, Mr. Atheist, since you know so much, what percentage of all things would you know? Oh, it's just tiny little percent. Cool. Let's say you know 1% of everything. Then in this 99% of things that you don't know, how do you know that the truth about God isn't there in that 99%? I've cleaned this up quite a bit because they will sloppily say, how do you know God isn't in there? And well, because this is a list of facts, and there may be facts about God there, but that's not God. Unless it is. Unless you want to say that those facts are God. Cool story. Ha ha ha, I beat the atheists in no time at all. Everybody stood up and clapped, and a bald eagle came down and landed on my head as the Holy Spirit consumed everyone in the room and turned them into the next generation of apostles. I mean, to varying degrees, that's where that story goes. It betrays their fundamental misunderstanding about debates, about the burden of proof, about falsifiability, about the need to be, or their need to be viewed as a hero, and an utterly dishonest misrepresentation of the opposition. Debates, as somebody who's done a bunch of them, are specifically best and real, I guess, for lack of a better term, when there's equal footing, when you have equal amounts of time, when you have equal interaction, when you're putting people on a, level playing field. So this one is incredibly simple because it demonstrates that they don't understand a thing about what they're talking about. Because even in the story, if they're there to prove God and the other side's there to disprove God, that's not how the debate works. Atheists don't need to disprove God, just like I don't need to disprove Bigfoot. All I need to do is show that the case that they're making is either rational to accept or irrational to accept. That's it. The notion that somebody would have to disprove God suggests that there's a God claim that is necessarily falsifiable, and that may not be the case. They don't understand falsifiability or the burden of proof. And so the easy thing here is that not only that, but the preacher didn't prove God in this debate. And no, there may be one out there in the realm of things that I don't know. There may be a version to this where he goes on to prove God, but I'm unaware of that. But it gives the illusion that they proved God by proving that the atheists are just smug asses who dismiss a God, even though it might just be something that's beyond the realm of things that they know. Ha ha ha, I am victorious. No, you weren't. You didn't prove God. Even if something about this story was true, and not just a Goodwill Hunting moment, even if something about this story was true, you didn't prove God. You might have proved that someone was overreaching in their assertion about whether or not a God existed. Goodwill Hunting, by the way, there's a joke that one of them tells, and somebody calls them out and says, oh, that didn't really happen to you. No, but it's a joke. So you tell it in first person. It has that kind of impact. This is why preachers steal and borrow and buy their sermons, Because quite honestly, a lot of these stories are just so stories, fish stories. They're stories that make the preacher look good, or that make somebody look good, or maybe if they don't want to be too obvious, they'll tell it in a third person thing, like, there was a student who was sitting there in front of their professor, and the professor said that there is no God. And the student said, Professor, how much do you know? Or do you have a brain? Or any number of things. All of these are the cute little anecdotes. And that's what you present when you don't have evidence for your belief. I can't recall ever hearing about scientists presenting anecdotes mocking flat earthers as their case, or mocking anti-evolution or anti-vaxxers or anything as their case. Maybe vaccines work and you just don't know it. That's not the way the case for reality works. It seems like a really simple thing because no sensible person rationally believes that they know everything. Most folks recognize that there are truths out there that they could be aware of, and that they have access to a vanishingly small percentage of facts about reality. They'll often put up a graph like this, and it'd be like, up here in this, upper area, that represents the knowledge that you have about reality. And all of this down here represents all the things that you don't know. Is it possible, you smug atheist, that the truth about God exists here in this area that you don't know? Yeah. Oh, then you're not an atheist, you're an agnostic. Oh, that's the thing. Yes, I'm both an atheist and an agnostic, because those aren't mutually exclusive terms, and agnosticism isn't some middle ground between theism and atheism. Theism is the position that some God exists. Atheism is the rejection of that position. And as knowledge is a subset of belief, Gnosticism and agnosticism are subsets of beliefs. And so one could be agnostic on the issue, not claiming to have knowledge on the issue without necessarily asserting a position. But yes, you can be an agnostic and an atheist. Those aren't mutually exclusive. But even if they were, that's not what you were called there to prove there, preacher. You weren't called there. You were called there to prove God, not prove that someone claiming to be an atheist is actually just an agnostic, as if that's a thing. All you did was betray your complete misunderstanding about another thing. But let's consider this diagram for a second. When we make a list of all the things that we know versus all of the things that could be known, there are, for example, if this is every fact ever in existence, I have marked the part that we know much more broadly than I think is justified. It would be vanishingly small. It would barely be visible, if visible at all. But that's every fact. What if we constrained this not to every fact, but every fact that is worth knowing? That changes things a little bit, and yet I would still say that line is too big. Of all the potential facts worth knowing, that virtually all of us would consider worth knowing, it's still a vanishingly small portion that we actually know. Could it be that the truth about God? Yes, it could be the truth about God. As a matter of fact, that's what I'm saying, is that the truth about whether or not there's a God, as far as I can tell, exists in this unknown space. And that seems to be true for everyone. The claim some God exists is either true or not, and that truth is currently unknown, and it's seemingly unknown to everybody. And weirdly, which I'll get to towards the end, there are theists that agree with that, and actually go further and assert that it can't be known. So, is the truth about God there in the unknown? Yeah, as far as I can tell, it absolutely is. Believers are the ones that are claiming access to that knowledge. Believers are ones that are claiming that they know the answer. Where's the demonstration of that? That's what we're looking for. The irony that they would then accuse the folks who are objecting to their claim to knowledge of being too arrogant and dismissive. Well, I get it. Many of us, including me, will frequently come off as arrogant and dismissive because it's incredibly frustrating to keep having to say the same thing over and over again when throughout the entirety of human history, people have believed things without good reason, asserted them without any justification, and then when they are challenged on it, refuse to accept reason, refuse to understand, or incapable of understanding the burden of proof, the nature of evidence. They just want to stick with their beliefs, and they're just going to keep doing it. And then that causes strife and conflict. And when the rational individuals acknowledge, this is ridiculous, you've been told this 5 million times that you do not have justification for this. Oh, how do you know I'm wrong? I didn't say that your position was wrong. I'm saying that you have not provided any justification for believing your position, which means that you are wrong to believe it, given the information you've presented. And if in fact you weren't wrong to believe it, it should be really trivial for you to present the reason you believe it instead of pretending that I'm wrong to reject it. This is the difference between, as we talked about before, not guilty versus innocent. You are saying that God is guilty of existence. I'm saying God is not guilty of existence. I am not saying God is innocent of existence, because that may not be demonstrable. But if we think about that area with the question mark, that area of the unknowns, is it possible that there are things in there that would change things that we include in the knowns? Yeah, it seems possible that we might learn something that would fundamentally change something else that we already list as a known. That seems to be happening with pretty good frequency, although there is a limit. We don't tend to find new discoveries that completely turn something on the head, on its head, so that the opposite is now true. Instead, we tend to find and discover things that refine our understanding. Is it possible that there's a square circle, or the truth about a square circle in there? No, the truth about a square circle is already in the knowns category, and that is, given the definitions that we're talking about, a square circle cannot exist in reality. That is a truth that we know. But how do you know that out there isn't something that flips out on its head? It is a matter of definition. There are a number of different categories by which we can determine that things are impossible or possible, or that are known or unknown. And so things like logical impossibilities fit into the known, non-real. Definitional impossibilities, most certainly. Now, it could turn out to be that there might be the truth about something else in there that we might call a square circle. Some different claim, either sloppily worded or with some different context, which winds up being used as an equivocation fallacy. For example, I'm a magician. There's a magical parlor prop called a square circle. Square circles exist. I have one. Actually, I don't have one in this room. I have one in the other room. Square circles exist. But that's not what is meant by the logical impossibility of a square circle. It's just something called a square circle. You might as well say, God exists because I'm going to call my cell phone God. That's roughly the equivalent of that. So what about things that are like epistemic possibilities? Is it possible that there's a true duplicate of me out there somewhere that I just don't know about? No, it's not possible. Oh, that's ridiculous, Matt. How can you say that? Because me, the package of me, by definition, includes my temporal spatial position and the matter that I am currently made up of. The definition of me changes constantly. There might be, although I have no reason to believe it's true, a copy of me somewhere else. But if I have 2 copies of the same book, I have two things. This book and this book are not identical. They're made of different matter, they're in different spaces, and they're acting in different time frames. Once again, this is all about the burden of proof. What might be? If we go out there and look, who knows? And if we find a God out there, then that will be the time to believe it. And if we find a God out there, if we find in that area of things that we don't know that it turns out there is a God, at that point it will become known. It will move from that unknown section into the known section, and then it will be rationally justified for people to believe it. Until then, nobody's provided a rational justification for believing that. Now, what else might be out there? We don't know. But we are whittling it down by showing what most probably is and what may never be. To date, I'm unaware of any God claim that has escaped that unknown region via any means other than being shown to be not true, not a rational belief. So while preachers keep lying about their first-person accounts through purchased or stolen sermons, the people who aren't pretending to know things are out there searching for what's actually in that area, instead of being comforted by the delusional belief that they have a magical friend who absolutely knows everything that's in that questionable area or the unknown area. Russell's teapot, Bertrand Russell's famous analogy, saying that, perhaps there's a teapot that is orbiting the sun somewhere between Earth and Mars, but it's too small for telescopes to find. And so it could be there and be completely undiscoverable by us, at least by current means, which makes it not untestable in principle, but untestable with our actual resources. It is practically untestable. But that same thing applies to the invisible dragon or any untestable, unfalsifiable claim. And you can take anything that should properly reside in that unknown area marked with the question mark, and you can make any claim about that you want. But until you pull that information out of the unknown area into the light, the claim that the position is true or false, both of those claims are unsupported, and the default position, or null hypothesis if you prefer, is that even the rational tentative position suggests that we should reject both assertions until such time as they are pulled out. Oh, is there a Bigfoot? That's still in the unknown. We should reject any claim that there is a Bigfoot or isn't a Bigfoot until such time as it's pulled out of the known and demonstrated. Pulling something out of that unknown section because of a suspicion or a preference or a desire is the very definition of bias. And that's what we're trying to avoid by using reliable methods of exploring the world, scientific principles with independent observation, independent verification, attempted replication, and principles like testability and falsifiability. Just because you're convinced, that doesn't make something knowledge. I mean, you're convinced, and once you tell me, I have pretty good reason to suspect that you think you're convinced, but whether or not what you're convinced about is right is completely different. And weirdest of all, I get calls regularly on the shows from people who believe that there is a God and yet assert that the truth about that God doesn't just rest in that area of unknown, but always will. So you acknowledge that it's an unknown, and you're convinced that it will forever be an unknown. I don't know where the justification is for that. Even Russell's teapot might not forever be unknown as new technology allows us to investigate it. And yet, despite your assertion that it's an unknown and will always be an unknown, you believe it. I don't know which is worse. The lying pastors pretending that they grandstanded and own-sworred an atheist in a debate by never demonstrating God and just dismissing everything functional about sound epistemology, or the people who don't grandstand that way but feel smugly superior to both sides because their belief is immune to investigation and they find this acceptable and comforting. While I fully recognize that I'm not in favor of doxastic volunteerism. I don't think you choose your beliefs. I don't think you just merely decide, I'm going to believe this. You become convinced, and you can become convinced for bad reasons. What are the bad reasons that make them feel justified in accepting something while simultaneously acknowledging that it should be in a category where no acceptable position could be formed? I have no idea. We'll see you next time.